But I think I've given you enough good news. Now let me give you the bad news. The bad news, and this unfortunately is really bad news, is that the West, which has always been, I mean literally, not metaphorically, been part of the solution to many of the great global challenges, is now becoming, unfortunately, the problem. And I find the hardest idea to deliver into a Western mind is the notion to persuade the West that whenever you look at the world and you say, where are the problems? You know, the terrorists out there and there's instability out there. The rest of the world looks at the West and says, you are the problem. And this is how a majority of the 88% of the world's population who live outside the West now view the West. And this is why I had to write this book, to explain, wake up, and see how the rest of the world sees you now, and how you've become a generator of many of the world's problems. And how has the West begun to generate global problems? The first and the most obvious way, of course, is that if you have these massive shifts of power taking place, and believe me, we are experiencing far greater shifts of power today than we have seen in hundreds of years, you naturally have to readjust the world order, especially to accommodate the rise of Asia. But the West has got so used to having so many privileged positions in so many global institutions that it cannot conceive of the idea of giving up these privileges to make way for others. And it's very easy to cite examples. You know. The best, easiest example, of course, if you look at the two most powerful international economic institutions in the world, the IMF and the World Bank. To become the head of the IMF, you must be a European. To become the head of the World Bank, you must be American. And 3.5 billion Asians don't qualify, even though the world's fastest growing economies are in Asia, even though the world's largest pool of foreign reserves, $3 trillion, is in Asia. And even though today I think Asia is producing more PhDs in economics than anybody else is, and Asians don't qualify to run the IMF or the World Bank. And by the way, this rule was reaffirmed as recently as 2007. And not one leading Western voice said, when the head of the IMF fell open, isn't it time that we shared this responsibility with others, with other responsible stakeholders in the world? Not one voice said it. And that silence, which you all did not notice, was noticed by everyone else in the world. You see, they will never give up the power that they've got used to. And here in New York, of course, you see another example of it in the UN Security Council, which, you know, is clearly the world's most powerful international political organization. It makes decisions that are binding on member states. It can authorize the use of force. And clearly, as you know, when the Security Council did not authorize the use of force in Iraq, it created enormous problems for America. So it is an important organization. And one of the good things that the founding fathers of the UN did was to say that we must always give the great powers of the day a stake in the Security Council, in the UN, so that it doesn't die like the League of Nations. And that was a brilliant thought of the founding fathers. But I think what they had in mind was that you should see either the great powers of the day or the great powers of tomorrow in the Security Council, but not the great powers of yesterday. And that's the fundamental problem, because apparently the only qualification you now need to become a permanent member in the UN Security Council is that you should have won World War II in 1945. And this is 2008, and it's impossible to change. And you know, if you're looking at ways of changing it, you don't have to be a rocket scientist, okay?